Every once in a while, you just need some basic instruction in life. What am I supposed to be doing right now? But that's not always easy to get. I mean, if you go to a counselor, they're probably not going to tell you what to do. They'll help you figure it out, and they'll help you think through where you are, but they won't let you off the hook. They'll say, this is your work to do. You remember when you were young and a student, you'd go to the teacher just wanting to know the answer, and they wouldn't always help you. They would instruct you and teach you, but they didn't just give it away. I remember being in art class in middle school, and I'm not that artistic, and going to the teacher and saying, what is it you want me to draw? And she'd always say, well, just draw whatever it is that's in your heart. Like, I need more instruction than that, because it usually just came out stick figures. We all need a little bit of instruction every now and then. We who preach have different styles of preaching. Some of us preach more inductively, where we ask questions and then try to not give you the answer straight out, but get you to think a little bit. Other times when we're preaching, we do that deductive style, where we just tell you straightforward the truth and then expand upon it. Sometimes we need that straightforward. What is it that you want from us, Lord? I remember when I did the very first wedding that I was conducting, and I wasn't really sure what to do, and I was asking questions. Do you want it this way or that way? And finally, the wedding director took me aside and said, Nelson, you're in charge of this thing. Just tell them what you want them to do, or else this whole thing's going to be a fiasco. Sometimes we just need those point-blank instructions. Jesus both told parables, where he would tell folks, if you have ears to hear, let you hear, and they would take a while to figure out. Then other times he would tell parables that were just straightforward, or he would just speak straightforward in his teachings, like love your enemies. It's just a command. Today, as we look at our scripture about the sheep and the goats, about doing what is right in Christ's eyes, Jesus gives us very, very specific instructions. Jesus is telling us how we are to act towards others, because inasmuch as we do it to the least of these, we do it for him. Our window this morning is continuing to be the window in the balcony. If you want to look at that, you're welcome to, because if you look at it, there are 7 angels, and each angel is holding up a sign. It's as if whoever put the windows in our church said, here's your sign. This is what you're to be about. And you might have a hard time reading some of those, but they're very straightforward. They say, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the stranger, visit the fatherless, visit the sick, help the prisoner, bury the dead. If you look at those, you will recognize that 5 of those are our inasmuch sayings, that they are what Jesus told us to do for the least of these. And then there's a couple of others that are added into what are known in the church as the 7 acts of mercy. To be with the fatherless, or to help those who have lost their parents, to tend to the children. And the other says to bury the dead, which of course has become an act of the church for those who are grieving. So if this is so obvious, if Jesus said it straightforward, if we have signs in our church with angels holding them up, why aren't we doing it? We might say, well, Pastor, yeah, we're doing it. Well, yes, we're doing some. In some ways, we're doing a pretty good job. I mean, if we go through these and we think about feeding the hungry, our church was one of the founding churches of Iredale Christian Ministry. We have volunteers that serve in this, and we participate in giving away food through them. When we say clothe the naked, our church does have a clothing closet, and we even had not too long ago an end-of-season sale where we gave away a lot of extra clothes to shelter those who are in need, who are homeless. Our church participates with Fifth Street Ministries. Visit the fatherless. We are part of the Baptist Children's Homes that help take in children who are in need. Visit the sick, well, our ministerial staff and our deacons and our members do that most every week. Bury the dead. We have funerals here a lot. You could say, well, Pastor, it seems like we're doing these, but are we doing these to the best of our ability? Are we just writing checks? Or are we actually engaging in these ministries one-on-one? You might say, well, there's some reasons we don't do more. And I think the first reason is this, that we think of people as different. Those people over there that need help, and we differentiate ourselves from those who are the least of these. Why do we do that? Well, maybe it makes us feel better about ourselves, that when we help others, we're doing it from above. Nobody really wants to be in need. But I think we need to identify with the poor. This week I asked several folks, why don't we do these things more? And Tom Sherrod, who used to be the chaplain at our hospital, said this. He said, if we saw ourselves in the least of these, whom God has reached out to, we would be more likely to identify with them and help them. My friend Bill Leathers, who has preached here before, said that poverty invades our sense of safety. We have to keep it a little bit at bay. We have to say, maybe they're hungry because they deserve it. They haven't done right in life. Maybe they're not taking advantage of what's out there. And so when we separate ourselves from those who are most in need, we are less likely to identify with them and to see them. Did you recognize in Jesus' teaching that both those who did it and those who didn't do it said, when did we do it? Or when didn't we do it? They had a failure to recognize Jesus in the least. Sometimes I think that we don't help because it's overwhelming. If you do get involved in helping others, you begin to see the need, and the need is enormous, and we think, how can I make a difference? Other times we don't do it because we are so busy with our own lives. We are all about helping ours that we forget that there are others. We are like the priest and the Levite in the parable of the Good Samaritan, who are on our way somewhere, doing good sometimes, and just pass it by. Those are all excuses. Perhaps those are some reasons we don't do as well as we could with these inasmuch sayings. But I think it all boils down to this. I'm not sure that we really believe Jesus. He said, Pastor, of course we believe Jesus. Well, belief means action. Jesus straightforward says, if you want to show love to me, love these who are hurting. Did Jesus really mean that? Of course he did. He tells us point blank and straight out. My friend and fellow pastor Don Gordon says this. He says, most American Christian theology has become narcissistic. We want feel-good messages about improving ourselves and being good to ourselves when Christ calls us to reach out to the least of these. I was talking to Don this week, and we were talking about that community and the difference between our individual freedoms and the sense of responsibility to others. We don't believe Jesus because we don't see Jesus in these. Jesus is telling his disciples, I'm going to go away and you won't see me physically, but if you want to do something to show me your love, he doesn't say come to church. He doesn't say give money. He says love the neediest of these. You want to get close to me, get close to those whom I love. You see, when we get closer to the least of these, we're associating with those whom Jesus associated with during his life. I have a friend that likes to hike. We were hiking one time, and I talked to him about the different reasons he liked to hike, and of course, you just get out in the woods, and it's great, and you feel closer to God. And he says, when I'm hiking out here, though, I remember my friend Stan. He says, Stan and I used to hike together, and Stan is gone now. But when I'm in the woods, it reminds me of those times we had together, and it makes me feel close to him. Well, that probably happens to you too. There are probably things that you do that remind you of those you love. So the question is, if we want to identify with Jesus and to experience Christ today, what do? We go where Jesus would go today. We go among the least of these that he walked around and ministered to. I mean, what would it truly take for us to do these things? We would truly have to love Jesus with all of our heart and see Jesus in others. We would have to change our perspective, that it's not us and them, it is all us, and that Jesus is among them as well. I've heard people say that saying, but for the grace of God, there go I. What are they saying? They're saying the only reason that there's a difference between me and someone in need is that God has blessed me. And if God has blessed me, then I too must be a blessing. Sometimes we don't see the least of these until we become one of them, when something shatters our lives. Have you ever had something happen and it made you more aware of others in pain? I have a cousin who lost her teenage son to cancer. Now she's very aware of that pain in others. She volunteers at the hospital. She raises money for cancer research. It's constant because it is on her heart and in her mind because she has experienced that pain and loss. I know others who have been doing well in life, and then for no fault of their own, they've lost a job, and all of a sudden they are on the edge, and they begin to look around and see that there are others in that same situation. And they begin to care about those who are in poverty. Sometimes it's when we go through a life transition, like I know folks who have retired and all of a sudden have come to me and said, Pastor, we've got all this extra time, what should I do? And I say, oh, great, good question. You've been working towards success all your life. What about if you worked for significance? If you worked to change our world? If we moved from trying to achieve to trying to impact others? I have a pastor friend who told me recently that she's taking a seminar. She's in her 60s, and it's called The Last Third. And she said, you know, we kind of live lives in a third. When we're younger and then our middle, and now as I'm getting older, I've got this last third of my life, and the question is, what do I do with it to be most impactful? You see, when we really believe Jesus, it expands our horizons. We make bigger circles of friendships. It's not us and them, but it's all of us together. We begin to listen to each other. We begin to realize that we are a part of a community. We're not just individuals, but all of us, not just his church, but this place where we live. When we believe Jesus, we hear his words that say, if you're doing this to the least of these, you're doing that for me. The best way we can love God is to love those in need. The cross is central to our faith, where Jesus looks down upon us, all of us who are lost in sin, and dies for us because we are the least of these. And when we get that, we develop a missional lifestyle. It's not just about doing something once. I love mission trips. They're great. I love Operation Inasmuch that one day we go and do a lot of different stuff. But what if we had a whole different mindset? Ann Tambling, who is a consultant and also a missional pastor, says this. She says, we have the opportunity to see missions in a whole new way. Rather than simply participating in an event to help someone, missions should be a way to describe our very being and should be incorporated into our daily lives as we live as the people of God, as God has called us to be. Missions work is not an activity, but is a mindset. I like that. It's not just about a mission project, it's about a shift in who we are. Not just going and doing something once, but in changing the way we look at life. You see, our faith isn't like taking on a new job that we do for a little bit and then we rest from it and we might do this and then we go do that. Our faith is more like a change of our personality that's always with us. It is a transformation. That is why when Jesus tells us about the sheep and the goats, the folks that did the things to Jesus said, well, we didn't even know it. It just came naturally to them. What would it take for us to do that? We'd have to allow Christ to enter our hearts and minds in such a way that it changes our vision and our eyes are opened. Now you might say, Pastor, that's a lot to ask. It is. And we look at these 7 acts of mercy that are in these windows. I realize that you can't do all those every day. But I bet one of those things resonates with you. I bet there's something specific that you could look at doing. I've had several folks ask me, what about Operation Inasmuch this year? Are we going to be able to do that? Well, we're not going to do it in the way we've always done it, where we all come together and we eat some sausage biscuits and we go out and we do good and we come back and we talk about it. I love that. That's a wonderful day. But it's just not what we can do this year. So we're going to have to transform that. So I declare to you today that today and every day is Operation Inasmuch for us as a church. And I challenge you that you would this week, whether yourself or as a family, find something to do for the least of these. What could you do? Well, we're not going to go out and build handicap ramps as an entire church, but a group could get together and do that. We're not going to go out as a big group and clean up some yards, but I bet you might find a neighbor that has a need. We're not going to go over to 5th Street or our little Christian ministry and work in those ministries as a church, as a whole. But I bet you could call them up and say, is there a volunteer opportunity that I and my spouse or my children could do? We're not going to be making the soup kits that we like to make here on Operation Inasmuch. But could you put together a helping kit to have in your car? Maybe 1 or 2. Maybe you could do that with your kids. How do you do that? Well, you just think about what someone who is on the street might need. And you get your plastic baggie and you fill it up. You put crackers in there or single-serve snacks and some juice boxes or water bottles or Gatorade or something like that, and maybe a grocery gift card and some socks and maybe some deodorant or toothpaste or combs or Band-Aids or wet wipes. There's all kinds of lists you can find on the internet that will tell you what folks need and what they don't need. But you have these things and you write a personal note in there that we care and we love you, and you have it in your car, and when you see those persons and you think, well, I can't do anything, you say, oh yeah, I can. I've got this kit sitting right here in my car ready. What else could you do? Maybe this week you could think about someone who might be lonely, and you pick up a note card and you write to them or become a pen pal to one of our senior adults or one of our veterans. There are all kinds of things that you can do. But remember, I'm telling you, it's not just about one activity. It is about a change of our mindset. The thing that I would really challenge you to do as you look each and every week at these angels holding up these signs saying, "See Jesus in the least of these. Be his hands and feet." I would encourage you to build a relationship with someone in need. I told you about my friend Ann, who talks about missional lifestyle. I asked her this week, I said, "Ann, tell me about how that looks." And she said, "Well, I'll tell you a personal story." She said, several years ago, I decided to get involved in a program called Circles that matches folks in need with folks who have, and you work together and you become friends. It's not one above the other, but it's a coming together to see what we could do. And she said that she was matched with a young woman named Renee. And Renee had 3 young children. She was motivated. She wanted to do more. She wanted better for her kids. And so Ann and Renee began to meet each and every week. They had playtimes when their kids would get together and play with each other. Yes, they would have discussions about finances and budgets, and Renee wanted to buy a car, and they talked about how to save up money for that. And they did all those things. They took the kids to the Y to learn how to swim, and there were all kinds of stuff happening. But Ann said at the core of it, I was just being a friend. Today, her friend Renee is not in poverty anymore. She's gotten a car. She's working a couple different jobs. She's saving up money to buy a house. But better than that, she has a friend who cares about her. Ann said it would have been easy just to write a check. I could have led a financial seminar. I could have just taken some groceries, but instead I chose to meet someone, to let them into my life. And I said, "Ann, how did that turn out for Renee?" She said, "Well, great. But what it really became was a blessing for me." Because it wasn't just about helping someone. It was about getting closer to Christ and seeing Christ in the least of these. We've got windows. They give us some instructions of what it is that Christ has asked us to do with our lives.